David Chen walked into the Grand Palace Hotel at 11 p.m. with his 6-year-old daughter sleeping in his arms, exhausted after their flight was delayed 8 hours due to storms. As CEO of Chen Hospitality Group, he owned this hotel and 47 others across the country. But tonight he wasn't thinking about business empires, he just wanted to get his daughter into a warm bed. But when night manager Jennifer Walsh saw a tired black man in casual clothes asking for a room, she decided he looked like trouble. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked," she announced, despite the computer screen behind her showing 30 available rooms. What Walsh didn't realize was that she'd just discriminated against her own boss, and the consequences would transform not just her career, but the entire company's approach to treating every guest with dignity and respect. David Chen had built his hotel empire from a single motel his immigrant parents had owned in Chinatown, growing it into a billion-dollar hospitality company that prided itself on treating every guest like family regardless of their background or appearance. Chen had experienced discrimination himself as a young man, remembered being followed through stores and questioned about his right to be in upscale establishments, so he'd made inclusive hospitality the cornerstone of his business philosophy. Every Chen hospitality property trained staff to welcome all guests with warmth and professionalism. But David preferred to stay anonymous when traveling, checking in under aliases to observe how his hotels really operated when management thought no one important was watching. Tonight's trip to Seattle was supposed to be a father-daughter vacation, a chance to visit the Space Needle and Pike Place market while bonding with his daughter Emma after months of business travel that had kept him away from home too often. Night manager Jennifer Walsh had been working at the Grand Palace for 3 years, building her reputation on maintaining what she called appropriate clientele standards during her overnight shifts when senior management wasn't around to monitor her decisions. Walsh had perfected the art of discrimination through coded language and fabricated policies, turning away guests she deemed undesirable while creating plausible explanations that protected the hotel from legal liability. In her mind, a black man arriving late at night with a child was probably running some kind of scam, maybe planning to damage the room or skip out on payment, and definitely not the type of guest who belonged in a luxury hotel that charged $400 per night. When David approached her desk wearing jeans and a hoodie, carrying a sleeping child and dragging 2 small suitcases, Walsh saw exactly the kind of situation she'd been hired to handle discreetly and efficiently. "I need a room for tonight," David said quietly, trying not to wake Emma, who was exhausted from their long travel day. "Something with 2 beds if you have it available." Walsh looked at her computer screen, which clearly showed multiple room types available, but her prejudices overrode professional hospitality standards. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're completely booked tonight," she said with practiced insincerity. "You might try the motel district about 10 miles from here. They're more accommodating to families in your situation." The coded language was deliberate, suggesting that David's situation was somehow inappropriate for the Grand Palace, while directing him toward budget accommodations that Walsh considered more suitable for people who looked like him. David felt the familiar sting of discrimination, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times before building enough wealth and power to insulate himself from most forms of racial prejudice. Here's what Jennifer Walsh didn't know about the man she was turning away. David Chen wasn't just any traveler seeking accommodation. He was the owner of the hotel where she worked, the CEO whose vision had created the very job she was using to discriminate against him. Chen Hospitality Group's employee handbook, which Walsh had signed during her orientation, explicitly prohibited racial discrimination and required staff to treat every guest with equal respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status. The training videos Walsh had watched during her first week specifically addressed the kind of bias she was displaying, using real examples of how prejudice could destroy both customer relationships and legal liability that could cost the company millions in settlements and reputation damage. David's anonymous inspections had revealed similar problems at other properties, leading to terminations and policy changes, but the Grand Palace had previously seemed like one of his better-managed locations. The situation escalated when David asked to speak with a supervisor, and Walsh responded with the kind of condescending authority she reserved for guests she wanted to intimidate into leaving without causing further trouble. "Sir, I am the night manager, and I've told you we have no availability," she said, her voice getting louder to ensure other guests in the lobby could hear her asserting control over what she assumed was a difficult situation. "If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to call security to escort you from the premises." David looked around the elegant lobby of his own hotel, noting the marble floors and crystal chandeliers he'd personally selected during the renovation, feeling the surreal experience of being threatened with removal from a building he owned. Emma stirred in his arms, and David realized that his daughter was about to witness her father being humiliated by racial prejudice in a way that would teach her painful lessons about how the world sometimes treated people who looked like them. But David Chen hadn't built a billion-dollar company by backing down from challenges, and he certainly wasn't going to let his daughter see him accept discrimination without consequences for the people perpetrating it. "Ms. Walsh," he said, reading her name tag while keeping his voice calm and professional, "I'd like you to pull up your reservation system and show me these bookings you're referring to." Walsh hesitated, realizing that David was speaking with the kind of authority that suggested he understood hotel operations better than most guests, but her commitment to discrimination overrode her professional caution. "Sir, I don't need to show you confidential hotel information," she replied, "and I'm asking you to leave before this becomes a bigger problem for everyone involved." That's when David made the decision that would end Walsh's career and transform his company's approach to accountability. He pulled out his phone and called hotel security, not as a rejected guest, but as the owner demanding immediate assistance with a management problem. What happened next would become a case study in business schools about how discrimination could destroy careers in minutes when it targeted people with the power to demand institutional change. Hotel security arrived expecting to remove a difficult guest, but instead found David Chen explaining to his own employees how their night manager had violated company policy, federal law, and basic human decency by refusing service based on racial prejudice. The head of security, Maria Santos, had worked for Chen Hospitality for 8 years and immediately recognized her CEO, her face going pale as she realized the magnitude of Walsh's mistake. "Mr. Chen," Santos said, "I am deeply sorry about this incident. Walsh will be terminated immediately and will comp your stay and provide any additional accommodations you need." But David's response focused not on personal compensation, but on systemic change that would prevent other guests from experiencing the discrimination he'd just encountered. The revelation that Walsh had discriminated against the hotel's owner created immediate consequences that extended far beyond individual punishment to comprehensive policy reform across the entire Chen Hospitality Group. David used the incident as a catalyst for implementing real-time monitoring systems that tracked guest interactions, mandatory bias training that included consequences for discriminatory behavior, and promotion criteria that rewarded inclusive hospitality rather than just revenue generation. Walsh's termination was swift and public, serving as notice to every employee across 47 properties that discrimination would result in immediate career consequences, regardless of seniority or performance in other areas. The night that had started with David seeking a simple hotel room for his daughter became the foundation for industry-leading reforms that made Chen Hospitality a model for inclusive business practices. The media coverage of the incident focused not on David's wealth or business success, but on the universal experience of racial discrimination that transcended economic status and professional achievement. The story resonated with millions of people who'd faced similar treatment, proving that prejudice affected everyone regardless of their ability to fight back through legal channels or economic power. David's response, using his authority to create systemic change rather than seeking personal revenge, demonstrated the kind of leadership that transformed individual incidents of discrimination into opportunities for institutional improvement that protected future guests from similar treatment. Emma, who'd slept through most of the confrontation, woke up the next morning in a luxury suite, unaware that her father's experience had triggered changes that would make hotels more welcoming for families like theirs across the entire country. Jennifer Walsh's career in hospitality ended that night, her name permanently associated with the kind of discrimination that modern companies could no longer tolerate or ignore. The incident became mandatory training material for hotel staff nationwide, teaching employees that professional hospitality meant treating every guest with dignity regardless of their appearance, race, or perceived economic status. David Chen's anonymous inspections continued, but now they were supported by systematic changes that made discrimination less likely and consequences more severe when it occurred. The Grand Palace Hotel, once the site of racial prejudice, became the flagship property for inclusive hospitality practices that other companies studied and emulated. 5 years later, David Chen's experience had become the foundation for the Chen Foundation's work, promoting inclusive business practices across the hospitality industry. The foundation provided training, resources, and recognition for companies that demonstrated measurable progress in eliminating discrimination while serving diverse communities with genuine respect and professionalism. Emma Chen, now 11 years old, often accompanied her father to foundation events, learning that business success carried responsibilities to create positive change rather than just generate profits. The hotel room her father had been denied became a symbol of transformation, proving that discrimination always carried the risk of targeting exactly the person with the power to demand accountability and institutional reform. The lesson that emerged from that night at the Grand Palace was both personal and universal. Prejudice was not just morally wrong, but practically dangerous in a diverse society where the person you were mistreating might be exactly the person with the authority to ensure your actions had consequences. David's experience proved that wealth and success didn't provide immunity from racism, but they could provide the power to transform individual incidents of discrimination into systemic changes that protected others from similar treatment. The discrimination Walsh thought she was hiding behind professional policies had instead exposed the need for reforms that made inclusive hospitality not just company policy, but measurable business practice. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment about a time when you witnessed someone's prejudices backfire in unexpected ways. Hit subscribe for more stories about accountability, justice, and what happens when discrimination targets people with the power to create real change.